We're talking Milwaukee Bucks. What do we make of this team that made a mid-season coaching change last season? Can Glenn Rivers get them over the line, or are, as the kids say, are they cooked? Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and did you know that Ralph Lauren's son is married to a woman named Lauren? And she goes by Lauren. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at BasketballMonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter, as always, at RedRock_Bball, on TikTok at RedRock_Bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by the Game Time app. Download the Game Time app, use the code LOCKEDONNBA, and get $20 off your first purchase. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free, and we are available on all platforms. So thumb it up, leave a comment, subscribe, follow, bang, bang, bang. We're talking Bucks. Let's talk Bucks. So to talk Bucks this year, unfortunately for everybody, it's not Kane Pittman. But as everyone who knows Kane, they will all be well aware that he's a terrible bloke, and Justin Garcia is a much, much better person to have on the show. Justin, welcome to the show. And how does it feel knowing that you're always going to be a step up from Kane?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I agree that Kane is terrible, but I don't know if I'd say I'm better. It's still pretty heady shoes to fill, as we've learned this year.
As Kane becomes the face of ESPN all across the world,
Yeah.
He's too big for all of us here. So we're here just to talk about the Milwaukee Bucks, Justin, and this is a team that obviously, when me and Kane did this show for 5 years, we come on and we go, yeah, it's pretty boring. There's nothing changing. It's all the same stuff. It's like, what are we going to do? And we knock it out and it'll be 20 minutes ago. All right, I'll see you next year. And that was it. And now it's like turmoil everywhere. It's new coaches, middle of the season. It's coaches throwing equipment managers under the bus. It's all NBA top 75 all-time players struggling to shoot for periods of time. It's bilateral ankle surgeries. It's all over the place with this team, and that's what we're going to try and get into and discuss, like where this Bucks team is, what we can make of it. It's always hard to have a mid-season coaching change like we had last year with Glenn Rivers advising that they hire him, and he comes in. We know Doc has had a storied career of playoff failures, of taking undermanned squads to areas that they shouldn't go as well. I'm not going to sell him short on that sort of stuff. The main question I have about Doc here is, like, again, coming in mid-season, it's tough. So now he's had a full off-season to think of plenty of excuses. But what can he do now to improve now that he's had all of this time to actually have a proper off-season, heading into a proper training camp? What do you think the major difference will be?
So I guess first and foremost, I'm picking up number one Doc Rivers fan.
He just frustrated. He just annoys me. He frustrates me so much.
Look, I think the big thing is what you kind of touched on there too is, as he pointed out several times, it was not all that envious to step into the spot where he was. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. But what we saw last year was there was just process and organization that was lacking. There was structure that wasn't there. And I think that was the question that a lot of us had when you made that coaching change is, say what you will about Mike Budenholzer. And I think the portion of Bucks fans that were very anti Mike Budenholzer changed their tune last year when you saw, well, look, it can get worse. And you know what he brings. He brings in that structure, the organization, the systems, and he is one of the ultimate floor raisers in the game for coaches. You saw when he was gone how much he missed a lot of that. And, for Doc, I think we saw a lot of that start to get cleaned up. They started to get better defensively. And it was really just Doc not even implementing changes so much as coming in and saying, okay, we're just not going to do these things anymore. Players spoke at length, too, about he went up and down and basically gave them, here's what I expect from you. Here's what I need from you to do. And more importantly, here's what I need you to not do. And there were a lot of those types of conversations that you just got the sense those didn't happen under Adrian Griffin and earlier in the season. So I think a continuation of that is going to be a big piece of it. Camille and I have joked too that Doc kind of audited the class last season, that this is really his true full first season in Milwaukee here, because he also joked about he didn't know anything about the young players. They only had
what a
3
shock!
or 4
What
practices.
a shock that is. Doc Rivers and young players. Wow,
Well,
I am. Doc will be there for 5 years and he won't know anything about him.
Well, I mean, he knew quite a bit about Tyrese Maxey and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, as he's informed us since. But yeah, I mean, he didn't see a lot of them, and with the lack of practices, the offseason is his chance to really get to know that group. So I think just a continuation of level setting and seeing some of the growth, because I mentioned we did see some strides defensively. Then we saw those strides kind of disappear, that you started to see these building blocks and they just went away. I think the big piece of it was the structure piece that they were missing. But as you know, you kind of joked too, and we all did. There's a few of us on the radio broadcast last year that joked, I really long for the days of boring again, because that's what the Bucks were. That, they never made any headlines. They just went about their business. They kept everything very close, where there weren't all that many leaks. And then you go to Terry Stotts resigns a week before the season. Right. You bring in Damian Lillard on the eve of training camp and lose Drew Holiday, another coaching change, and all these reports and rumors of turmoil that started to come out. It was just not what you were used to. So I think the offseason gives them a chance to really hit the reset button. And I think the biggest thing is not only the structure, but Doc has mentioned quite a few times, his number one focus is really hammering out the Giannis and Dame piece and figuring out what works with these two. How do we really emphasize that? What do we need to spam? What do we need to get rid of? This has to work. And I think a lot of us just assumed, well, it's two of the top 75 players of all time. How wouldn't this work? But it really didn't for large portions of the season last year. So that is the other hope of, look, we've heard Doc talking about all these things they're going to work on. We've heard Dame himself talk about a bounce back season and ready to surprise people. I think that is the biggest thing to look forward to here this upcoming season with Doc specifically.
In terms of the guys who have arrived, they didn't make gigantic changes, but what they did do is they brought in Gary Trent, they brought in Taurean Prince and Delon Wright. They drafted AJ Johnson, which was a surprise, and Tyler Smith in round 2, but Doc will combine those for about 15 minutes total for the season, so we don't need to worry about those guys. But when we talk about those guys that arrive, and then when in a second we go and talk about the guys that left, they basically did exactly one-for-one replacements, replacing Malik Beasley with Gary Trent, Jay Crowder with Taurean Prince, and Patrick Beverley with Delon Wright, like the most one-for-one replacements you could find, and I would say one-for-one upgrades. Like, it's hard for me to suggest that any of those guys are worse than the guys they're taking over from. Now, Gary Trent's a guy that I have been critical of in the past. I think there are some things to his game which can be frustrating. And one of Malik Beasley's biggest strengths was that he would take a million threes, Justin. That is all he would do. Gary Trent should do that, but he doesn't. Like, he doesn't take as many as you want. He would take, I'm going to take 2 dribbles and step inside the 3-point line. You go, Gary, what are you doing? Step back out. To me, that's the big difference between these two players. Trent is a better defender. He's not a good defender, but he's a better defender. And it's about, can he sort of buy into this role, I guess, that you stand there and you shoot threes and you do nothing else. So what do you think the biggest thing that Trent brings that is that upgrade over Beasley?
Well, at number one, just the body, right? Because we were having the conversation before of, okay, who's going to start at 2 guard? And I think really post All-Star break last year, you knew it wasn't going to be Malik Beasley, that they were probably going to move on. And, frankly, you should have assumed that to begin with on a 1-year veteran minimum deal. But that really started to set in, and we saw AJ Green carve out a role on this team. He's one of the few young guys that Doc has spoke quite a bit about and really seemingly trusted from day one of arriving here in finding some minutes in the rotation. But I don't know that AJ Green is a starting caliber player quite yet, even if you have Giannis and Damian Lillard and Khris Middleton on the floor with you. So he answers that question of who's going to start and is it going to be AJ Green. I get your point, and I think it's very valid on some of the things that he will do that maybe you don't necessarily want him to do. We did see some of that from Malik Beasley last year, and it was always an adventure whenever Malik would do anything other than catch and shoot, specifically Malik in transition. But look, for the value of a vet minimum, I don't think anybody's going to dispute that in what you're getting. in Gary Trent. And, is he as good of a shooter as Malik Beasley? No. Depends. He's in that conversation. He's
Beasley to me is a really upper echelon shooter. Now the problem with Beasley is he can't do anything else. Right? He can't defend his way out of a paper bag. He can't get. I think he didn't have the lowest free throw rate of any player in the NBA. Basically, he does nothing else. But I feel confident in saying he is a better shooter, and he has proven that over multiple seasons. But that's not all that role is, because you said there are going to be times when someone in that position finds himself on a fast break and finds himself having to guard one-on-one. And the hope is that they don't appear on ESPN for, or on Shacked and a Fool for what is this guy doing? Which happened multiple times for Malik Beasley last season. So that is going to be something for us to watch there with Gary, who is going to have that relatively stable role. We've got to talk about the guys who left the team in a sec, but today's episode is brought to you by the Game Time app. Right now, you have the baseball's going. It's the middle of summer, and you want tickets for baseball? Well, Game Time is the place you want to go, because they are an authorized ticket reseller for Major League Baseball. Whatever tickets that you want, whether it is baseball or something else, Game Time's going to have it. They've got the all-in pricing, which is a feature that you can turn on the app that shows you the price all there. It's there. You don't have to worry about additional fees being added. You've got the flash deals, which chuck something going on in your local area right now. They go, hey, check out the phone, mate. Something's going on tonight. We've got cheap tickets. Go to it. And all of these different features they have is what makes Game Time the number one place to go and get your tickets. So download the Game Time app and take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Create the account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create the account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So we talked about who arrived. I've spoken about already who left on the team. But like I said, it's just a carbon copy of the guys who came in. Malik Beasley, Jay Crowder, who might be cooked, Patrick Beverley, who's gone to play in Europe. Thanasis Antetokounmpo is done at this point, and Danilo Gallinari, who was on this team allegedly at the end of last season. So while I asked all these hosts here, who is the biggest loss there, you've come in and said Malik Beasley, but we've talked about Beasley there. I've never seen a team, Justin, where the additions and the losses just perfectly marry up. It's not like you need to go, who's going to do what he did? Okay, yeah, he's right here. Like Delon Wright does exactly what Patrick Beverley does, but better. And Jay Crowder was cooked. And Taurean Prince, while he might be Darvin Ham's favorite person in the whole world, he's better than Jay Crowder. So, honestly, I don't even know what to say in terms of talking about these guys that have gone, because it's just really straightforward replacement stuff. What we will get into now is talking about the projected starters, which again is a really easy conversation. It's Lillard, it's Trent, Middleton, Giannis, and Brook Lopez. I do want to focus here, though, Justin, on Brook Lopez, because Brook Lopez had a very weird season. Now, he's old. We know this. He's revamped his career many times. At the start of last season, he did not look very good at all. There was talks about, hey, coach, let us actually play properly. And then the numbers started to come back. But I say it's hidden. It's not really hidden because I talk about it too much. But the second half of the season, a lot of Brook's numbers came down. His block numbers were pretty low. He was not the same player as he was for that hot stretch in November in that second half of the season. Was that just a random variance thing? Did you see that maybe Brook had lost half a step? Like, what happened in that second half of the season? Or was it just Glenn Rivers and the change in that scheme that sort of neutralized some of the numbers that Brook was able to put up?
I think it was a combination of both. I mean, Brook has lost half of a step. He's 36 years old. And
yeah, of course.
It's only natural, right? But he's still useful to this team. I think especially early on in the second half of the season and Doc taking over, there was a little bit of a feeling out process, I think, from both parties that we would see a handful of games where Brook wasn't on the floor late. And I think the big piece of this too is, we heard early in the offseason that there were these reports the Bucks want to get more versatile and change their defense. And I think a lot of Bucks fans just jump to the assumption of, well, that means trading Brook Lopez. I think what we've seen here is all along the focus was, we need to be more versatile defensively, but that includes Brook Lopez. We need to be able to play multiple ways. As long as Joel Embiid is in the Eastern Conference, theoretically, if you win the East, you may have to go up against Nikola Jokic. There's still that value of Brook Lopez, but this can't be the only way that we play. I think that's kind of been the message Taurean Prince may help you get there. That's really been the big thing that the Bucks have been missing, and I think has really kind of impacted how Brook Lopez has been viewed too. When you think back to it's already going on 3+ years, but the championship season, they were able to do those things because PJ Tucker could step in and be a guy that could essentially play the 5 for you and allow Giannis to roam. Or in those other matchups, you could have Brook Lopez on the floor. You could play both of them together. They've had nothing like that for the last couple of years, and their front line has taken quite a bit of hits in terms of depth. It's basically just Giannis, Brook Lopez, and Bobby Portis. So that really kind of handcuffs just how versatile you can be. He's still very valuable, I think. I think last year, too, part of it was when you look at some of his individual numbers, the blocks that you mentioned, his contests were up there once again, pretty in line with where they were the season prior. But the difference there was, it was by design the year prior to last year and really all throughout Bud's tenure in Milwaukee. Last year it was not. You had no perimeter defense, so he was constantly under attack. And look, the numbers obviously slip, but I think a lot of times it's easy, and we heard it from Bucks fans throughout the year, to kind of look at the last thing that you see on the play is somebody getting into the lane and hitting a floater over Brook Lopez or beating him and just assume, well, Brook Lopez is washed. He's not that good anymore. I think it was really tough to gauge last year because it is only natural for him to start to take a step backward at 36 years old, but he didn't have the support system around him as he did really in the first 5+ years in Milwaukee. Now, did they do enough to address that? That's the $1 million question. I mean, I think they're certainly better on the perimeter defensively, but I don't know if they have quite enough to make up for what you really need with the style that Brook Lopez is going to play.
Just quickly, there's not a lot to talk about with Giannis. He's Giannis, but of course he had the injury at the end of last season and didn't play in the playoffs. But we did see him play over summer for Greece through the Olympics and that sort of thing. Every year there's like, Giannis's knee is a problem. Now we had this calf issue, but like at the moment, he is healthy. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, that's good. That's all. That's all we need to talk with Giannis. He's there. But let's talk about the bench because this is where some interesting stuff. Delon Wright comes in. I really like Delon. If he was to play 24 minutes, he would be really useful in fantasy. Now we saw Patrick Beverley get a role like that at times, so that's one to watch. Pat Connaughton, for some reason, played point guard last season. His assist numbers did jump up. Andre Jackson played. Doc came. He then became a zombie. We never saw him. Taurean Prince. But I do want to focus here on Bobby Portis because maybe this is controversial. I'm not really sure what Bucks people are thinking. But I think the Bucks may have a Bobby Portis problem. I think that he can come in. He's a huge culture guy. He's a big vibes guy. The crowd loves him. I would say the last couple of years he has been quite below. I'll say bad, but definitely below average. And in the playoffs, it gets worse. He can come in. He fills in for Giannis at times. He fills in for Lopez. He scores well. He shoots the ball really well. But defensively, like he's dreadful. He shot 25% from 3 in the playoffs. His EPM's been negative the last 2 years and negative 2.4 in the playoffs, which is a horrendous number. And he's not young. How old is he now? He's 28. He's 29. He's going to turn 30 at the end of the season.
Younger than Giannis.
Yeah, well, that's crazy. Bobby Portis' career is so weird. Like, who remembers that he played for the Knicks or the Wizards? Like, where did those seasons come from? But I also think that at the moment, he's quite bad and he gets this value because he can score and he can shoot and he's this good energy guy. Is there a concern that because he is the backup center. Like, there is nobody else. Like, there's no one else who's going to be able to, like, Andres Pasnik, so they signed for a 2-way. Like, who cares? That's not it. But Bobby Portis is it. And with Giannis having injuries seemingly every season and Brook Lopez being 36, they could be relying upon Bobby Portis a lot. And I don't think that's a good thing.
Yeah, we saw that in the title defense year where, and look, that's the thing, too, is if you're assessing value for Bobby Portis, he's an incredibly valuable regular season player because he plays and he puts up, back of the card numbers.
Correct.
The points that you raise about the playoffs, they're valid. And I think it's all things that Bucks fans have either been discussing or started to come to grips with really last year. And it's easy to forget the year they won the championship, his first in Milwaukee, there were large stretches of the playoffs. I mean, we think back to when you have the conversation about Bobby Portis, I think it's easy, and I'm not saying you're doing this, it's easy for others to say, well, he's kind of regressed the last couple of years. there were large stretches in that title year where he was unplayable.
They didn't
he
play
didn't
him.
play the back half.
Mhm.
Yeah, he didn't play the back half of the series against the Nets. He only played really against the Hawks because Giannis went down into that series. And there were other stretches in the Sun series in the finals there where you had to really limit the minutes. And it kind of goes back to the Brook Lopez discussion too, how it all intertwines with the depth and the hits that their front court has taken through the years with other pieces you can plug in there. I mean, even having maybe not so much last year, but the first go around when they had him, even having a guy like Robin Lopez as a backup big that you can plug in there, it brings you value in the regular season, especially since, you have these three guys. We've seen the importance of Giannis especially, but the way you're going to use him, Brook Lopez as well, being healthy for the playoffs, you're running a pretty high risk when you're just going at it with these three for the regular season to eat up all of those minutes. So I think that is a back of the mind concern for a lot of Bucks fans. But I do think last year the challenge with Bobby Portis is he's the ultimate fan favorite because of his personality. And I've even heard from others within the team too that, you certainly heard a lot of the chatter last year. I think there was a majority of Bucks fans that probably assumed he was going to be traded in this offseason in a cap-saving move and a way to get under that second apron because of that value that he brings. But I have heard from multiple people, like one of the concerns that we do have is how tight the locker room at least was, and it still is for the most part. But the role that Bobby Portis has there in his relationship with the rest of, guys we've seen before, you make that type of trade, it's tough during a season and sometimes onward too for a locker room to recover when they lose a type of guy like that. Look, you have to weigh what you're going to bring back in return, but I think that's part of it that he brings. But, when you just look at the numbers, this is who Bobby Portis has been throughout his career in the postseason. And you understand the strengths that he brings. There are weaknesses as well. So it really is that versatility piece where you kind of need other guys to pair off with him where, here's 10 to 15 minutes where we can play Bobby Portis and we can pick our spots. The last 3 years, unfortunately, the Bucks have not been in that spot where you've just needed a lot of Bobby Portis.
We're going to talk about someone later on that might be an interesting option in terms of getting some of the Portis minutes. We'll get to that in a second, but now we're going to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. It is still the summer. I am reliably informed as it's really cold over here, but it's still hot over there. And in the summer, we know what that means. It's the off-season for many sports, so there's just not as many things going on. But FanDuel doesn't care because they're going to get you involved. They want you to make the most out of your summer because there is the WNBA about to start back up. Major League Baseball is absolutely rolling at the moment as we push towards the playoffs. Shout out to the Padres, who are the best team in baseball at the moment. Check out World Series odds. You can check out NBA odds because what FanDuel's going to give you, every single customer, every single day of summer, you get a boost or a bonus. What a deal. Not new customers. No, do this and win and then get it back. No. Everyone just gets a boost or a bonus every day over on FanDuel. So make the most out of your summer. Check out FanDuel.com right now to get started. FanDuel is an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. And don't forget to gamble responsibly. All right, shout out to everyone who does watch this show, all the everydayers out there who are watching this show and consuming all the stuff we're putting out there, and of course all the everydayers on the Bucks side of things. Now we need to get into something that has been a problem for Milwaukee. There's lots of problems for a team as good as they are. There's always these lingering concerns, Justin, because what's going on with Khris Middleton? Every year there is something happening. That's a knee issue. It's a knee surgery. It's a wrist surgery. And now we come out and go, we're having bilateral ankle surgery. That is not great. When did this sort of thing happen with Middleton? What? I know we had multiple injuries during the season, but it didn't seem that it was that severe. And I'll say it now. If the Bucks come out and say he's going to be ready for opening night, I'm just going to say bullshit. I don't believe them.
We've heard that before.
I do not believe them. I refuse to believe them. What do you know the nature of the surgery? Is it realistic that he's back? Again, I don't believe them. But given when it occurred was in May, it is reasonable he's returning. But man, I just cannot trust this at all.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is surface level view is yes, he should absolutely be ready for the regular season. But I mean, it's been a number of times. You think back to 2 years ago too, where we heard the same thing in the same timeline for Khris and for Pat Connaughton. And
That's
neither of those guys were ready for the start of the season. It was about a month into the season before we saw them. With Khris, and that was another one of the.
And then Griffin did it last year as well with Middleton. Remember, he kept saying, he wouldn't give the clear answer. Is he ready to go?
We didn't get a clear answer, and it was always, he's going to be close.
He's around. He's there. Okay, cool.
And I mean, the way we learned about it too was rather interesting, where I think there was some murmurs and some scuttlebutt of, hey, I heard Khris had a procedure done, but nothing was really concrete. And then as you're watching Summer League, Doc Rivers just casually mentions, Khris had dual ankle surgery, but he's going to be ready soon. So it was two separate ankles. The ankle injury that cost him most of the second half of the season that he suffered against the Suns, when he ironically came down on Kevin Durant's foot. It sounds like he had that cleaned up, and then the ankle injury that he suffered in the playoffs against the Pacers on the other foot, he had that cleaned up as well. That one too, I mean, you do wonder how much was it, hey, we just need you to play, Khris, because that looked like a very bad injury, and just the way that things were piling up for the Bucks in that series, you got the sense of, here we go again, another thing. So I wasn't too surprised to hear there was a procedure to come from that ankle injury, but I think we all raised an eyebrow when you saw, wait a minute, and something from the injury that he suffered all the way back in February. But yeah, when you have that done early in the offseason, you should theoretically be ready for training camp in the regular season. Just the way we've seen the Bucks take their time with this, I'm not going to make a guess one way or another whether or not he's ready for the regular season, but it is the larger conversation with this team of expectations that I know we'll get to. I just don't know because, on the one hand, let's be extra cautious with these guys. We've seen 2 years in a row the importance of you got to have your guys, especially when you're top heavy in the postseason, but also, I mean, resting guys and building in more of those days off in the regular season, that's no guarantee that you're going to be healthy in the playoffs.
Exactly. And it is a frustrating thing. But this is also what happens when your team is old, when everyone's 32, 33, 34, 35, and pushing even higher than that. One thing that is interesting about Middleton is that people will talk about that, it's a real struggle why they give him this money. He's been bad. But when you look at like impact metrics, he's had the same EPM 5 out of the last 6 years. Like 2.6, 2.5, 2.3, 2.2. There was a 4.2 in there. There was a 2.5. When he's there, fine. I actually don't have any problem with how he's been playing when he's there. It's just that, he played 55 games at only 27 minutes a night last season. He only played 24 minutes a night the year before because he was just coming back from multiple injuries. So when we're talking about like the trust in him, it's not in his ability or the way he performs. It's like, can you actually get out there and stay out there? And of course, that's where the larger concern comes with him and with so many players in the league. But this does bring us now, Justin, to talk about we talk about Bobby Portis and some of the struggles he had and the lack of depth in the front court in Milwaukee. And I went to Las Vegas Summer League. I watched the Bucks. I wanted to get a view of AJ Johnson, see what Tyler Smith was up to, and then saw a guy. And I go, who's this guy? It was Chris Livingston, and he was really impressive. And he was, to put it bluntly, he was terrible last season. And I was going to put up people watching on YouTube, put the stats up. I was going to put up his stats from last season. He averaged 1 point and 0.4 rebounds.
I mean, there's nothing to put up.
It tells me absolutely he played like 10 minutes. Standard Doc Rivers, young guy mode. Again, that's why we don't think AJ Johnson or Tyler Smith are going to play that much. But in Summer League, he was great. 15 points, 9 rebounds. He was attacking the rim. He did it on only 20 usage. He shot the ball well, but not like extremely well. He just looked like a really strong, physical, attacking power forward. And at the moment, Taurean Prince will get some of those minutes, but he'll have to play the 3. Bobby Portis, we know he's concerned. At the moment, you don't have him as part of that 10-man rotation. Again, I understand, because if you're under 27, Doc Rivers doesn't really want to know too much about you. But he impressed. Now, if that improvement is real, do you think he could play like a 15-minute a night role in this team?
Yeah, I do. For the reasons that we went over before of who's going to fit that role, who's going to fill that void. He's technically a 3, but you mentioned the size too, that he's guy strong, that it's easy to envision. He's strong. He's built with his wingspan. Yeah, I think he can handle some 4 matchups defensively. There was one game last year, and it's one game, literally. I think it was against Utah, it was a dreadful game for the Bucks. It was right before Adrian Griffin's firing. Things were starting to really bubble up where you were waiting for this team to turn the corner and build some consistency. It never came. And they had a game at home against the Jazz in early January where, you were kind of looking at, okay, this is a game where we need to see something because you're fresh off of either a 3-game losing streak or 3 out of 4 losses, something like that. And they were down 30-plus points at halftime to the woeful Utah Jazz, where you just got the sense of something's going to happen here. But that opened the door for all the reserves to play. And granted, it was garbage time. But in that game, I think he played 15 or so minutes. He started to show you some things where you saw, okay, this translates. And he's a guy, too, you mentioned it. When you look at him, he looks the part. When you say we need bigger wings and guys that are going to be able to switch and defend multiple positions, that's the guy you would envision. You would look at and say, okay, this guy should be able to give us that. I was very encouraged by what we saw in Summer League. He brings a pretty high pedigree as well when you think about his prep career, going to Kentucky, being a part of that, being one of the last, I think the last pick of the draft 2 years ago. There's definitely talent there, but the thing that stood out too, especially during Summer League, when you'll see guys in the G League too, that you're looking to stand out. So you see guys that are just chucking and getting up shots. Yeah. He was doing some of the little things. I agree. And he was doing what coaches would be looking for him to do. And even early in the offseason, after the draft picks were made, and we heard from Doc Rivers and John Horst specifically mentioned Chris Livingston and said Chris Livingston has been working his butt off all of last season into the offseason as well, and we do think he's going to be a contributor. Now, that may be lip service, but the fact that John Horst chose to single him out when you have a number of other young guys, Marjon Beauchamp you could mention. We think it's going to be a bounce-back season for Marjon, or you could really tout Andre Jackson Jr., they chose to single out Chris Livingston. And to me, given what we went over with Bobby Portis, and you need somebody else that can take that forward responsibility. I know Taurean Prince can do some of it, but you need somebody other than just Taurean Prince and Bobby Portis. I think that leaves a big opportunity between that and what we heard how John Horst views him for Chris Livingston to make the most of what he's given. And look, as we saw with AJ Green last year, that's how he really cracked the rotation. It was garbage time. It was finding minutes where, all right, we'll get him out there for 2 or 3 minutes and see if he's hitting shots. He did. And with that, Doc Rivers started to build more trust in him. And he was the guy that was consistently playing the most of all their young guys a season ago was AJ Green because of those types of opportunities. So I do think there's going to be a similar type of opportunity at stake here for Chris Livingston this season.
If you look even at his G League numbers last season, he only took 4 threes a game, but he hit him at 38%. Yeah. And if you're taking 4 to 5, probably you want him to someone who's going to play in the NBA and be a stretch 4. Like you want him taking 6 per 36 or whatever. But if you hit him at 37, 38, you're grabbing 7, 8 rebounds, some defensive ability, some strength. It is interesting because he was bad in most of he didn't play last season. He was a guy that struggled in college as well. He's right, the final pick of the draft. It's just, again, given the way the roster looks and the fact that there's just nobody in that front court, he's in. You've rightly put it out there as the guy, a player to watch. Now, you've said on the other side of things, a player that might be in a make or break type scenario. And this is another younger player that came from the G League Ignite. You've mentioned his name already. Marjon Beauchamp was a first-round pick. He had some moments where he started games over the last couple of seasons. Doc arrived, and you'll be shocked to know that Doc said, we're not going to play you very much, my guy. You seem a little bit too young for me to get out there, which, that's how Doc likes to roll. Beauchamp, you can look at the surface numbers for him in Summer League as well, and they were okay. I've never been impressed. I've seen him the last 2 years at Summer League. The year before, I thought it was terrible. This year, again, like you're in the third year, you should be dominating and destroying these games. You should be
graduated.
And but even I think he led the team in scoring in Summer League, and I still watched it and went, yeah, but like...
It wasn't efficient.
It's like, look, whatever. Like, I didn't go, holy shit, get this guy off the court. He doesn't need to be here. I went, all right, you should be doing this, but probably should be doing a little bit more. And I don't really know what he does. That's good. At this point, he's had opportunities, and I put his numbers up because he did play some games last season. He had 15 usage. He played 13 minutes. He shot 40% from 3, but didn't take any attempts. I agree with you that it's make or break for him. I don't know that he's a rotation player.
I mean, he certainly wasn't a year ago,
No.
and
rightfully so.
Yeah, and the interesting part of it too is, look, I don't think it was just lip service that the Bucks really went out of their way to speak up how much they think he's going to develop and the importance that they perceived him to bring when they were able to draft him. Now, part of that too is, look, we don't have much in terms of young guys, and that's been the one interesting thing this past year for the Bucks. Granted, it's not blue chippers that we're talking about, but for the longest time, it was really just one young guy that you were looking at. It was Dante DiVincenzo and a bunch of vets, or, you know, all the way back in the day, Rashad Vaughn and DJ Wilson when you were waiting for him to develop. It's just been one guy taken outside of the lottery or late in the first round, and none of them have really hit. Now, you fast forward to last year and into this season, they've got a number of these young guys. Are any of them guys that you would look at and confidently say their ceiling is a starter? No, but there's a place for role players, especially when you're a top-heavy roster, that they have those intriguing names. That's the other challenge, is I think MarJon has really gotten lost in the shuffle when you talk about this summer what Chris Livingston has started to put together. The fact that he's kind of blended into that same positional group with Andre Jackson Jr. and with AJ Green. And I think that's the thing he was up against last year was, you know, we talked about Summer League. You can look at the numbers and say, oh, okay, it must not have been bad. But when you watched it, it wasn't efficient. And you just expected more ease and dominance for a player that has NBA minutes under his belt. And he was in his third Summer League, which is already very uncommon. It was a disappointing output that you saw from MarJon there. But when you look at, okay, where's he going to contribute? If you need that youth and athleticism defensively, Andre Jackson Jr., granted he fouls and has that foul issue, but Andre Jackson Jr. is a better point of attack defender and team defender than MarJon Beauchamp. If you need a guy that's going to juice the offense and be able to play on the fast break or give you shooting, AJ Green surpassed him there as well with his catch and shoot ability and ability to stretch the floor. So he's kind of been caught in no man's land last season, and he's almost been a man without a country that you don't know, okay, where can we slot him in? I think that's been the challenge. And I think the other piece defensively, really, that's the area where MarJon would be able to carve out a spot with this team. But when the Bucks drafted him, you envision this guy that once he continues his development, he could defend 1 through 4. I heard a number of people say that. And you saw early on, he did okay with bigger guys. It was the smaller guards that really gave him problems. Last year, it was the opposite. So there hasn't been this consistency, and it's not like he's been building upon his defensive portfolio. I think every time he's added something, something else has come away. So it's just been 1 step forward, 2 steps backward all 3 years here for MarJon.
Let's talk about what I deem the burning question for this team, Justin, heading into this season, because obviously they made the big deal last season to bring in Damian Lillard. And again, there are a lot of complicating factors like coming in late in the process, the Terry Stotts situation, the change of coach, all that sort of stuff. But Damian Lillard had some real struggles last season. His shooting numbers weren't where they were in previous seasons. Remember, he was named to be a starter at the All-Star game, and I didn't think that was necessarily the wrong call, because I thought his beginning of the season was pretty good. It wasn't Damian Lillard's style. It wasn't his usual absolute elite. We lock this guy in at these numbers, but it was very good. And then after that, it wasn't as much. He did drop off considerably, right? What do you think was the cause of this? Now, that's well documented. He had turmoil in his personal life. Many things happening there. He's still, wasn't happy, I'm guessing, over the way the whole trade scenario played out. Not to say he's unhappy in Milwaukee, but that wasn't what he wanted. It was very clear. Moving cities, dealing with stuff with his kids, all of that sort of stuff. Or, we can put all that stuff there and we can all look at that on a human level and go, okay, that makes sense. We know that there is all these struggles. Or he's old, right? He's old and you lose a little bit in your legs and the shot isn't there and you don't finish at the rim as well and your three-point shooting isn't quite where it needs to be. If you had to bank on one of those two things and get the off. I don't know where he's at with his custody staff and his kids and how settled he is. I don't know where that is at the moment. I'm sure we'll get some color on that at some point. Maybe we don't. I don't know. But which one do you think is more likely to have been the cause of the way things didn't unravel but did drop off as the season went off? Is it that, or is it the fact that he is getting older now?
So, I mean, I guess what's more realistic, the math history would tell you it's probably, well, he's getting old and he's had a couple of injuries to overcome the last couple of years. I'm going to remain optimistic and choose to believe it was just a very, very strange year for Damian Lillard. I mean, I'm not trying to suggest it explains all of it. He himself pointed out, look, I didn't really do much last offseason.
True, yeah.
I didn't feel like I was in the shape that I needed to be in. And, I don't know if it so much speaks to his conditioning, but we did see there were a number of stretches last year that it wasn't injuries where he missed time, but it was some personal stuff that he was dealing with the divorce hearing and custodies, that he would leave and return to the team after a game or two away. And each time he had one of those gaps where he returned, he came back very strong, and then it would start to kind of tail off. I think especially early in the season, that play, I mean, that was basically Damian Lillard calling his own number, not in a bad way, but there just wasn't structure. And all those games, the record under Adrian Griffin, it was the talent that was winning. There was no real game plan. And that was, the big thing that Doc Rivers tried to pick apart and say, look, we got to figure this out, was the pairing between Dame and Giannis. It just wasn't yielding the results that you would have expected. That it wasn't quite your turn, my turn, but there was a lot of components to that. And, the other part is early in the season, there was that first game that Giannis missed against the Raptors, where Damian Lillard had his best game to date as a member of the Bucks, when everything was efficient. He had almost 15 assists, I think, in the game, scored close to 40 points. And it just felt like, okay, maybe this is what was needed to unlock it. And he went on a nice stretch after that, and that kind of carried him through the month of December, where it just seemed like, okay, I'm back to the Dame that I was in Portland. And the same thing with Giannis. There was a game early in the season against the Pacers when there was no Dame. Giannis had a 40-point game, and everything funneled through him. That it just seemed like it was never quite down, and the two of them never really figured out. They both talked about, we didn't really have a chance to come together in the offseason and work on things. And then everything early in the season was such a whirlwind that we were kind of figuring out on the fly. So I think there are reasons for optimism to say, okay, Dame has said he's going to be in great shape. It's, he said after game 6 and the loss to the Pacers, people are going to be surprised when they see me next year. When you say that, you have to back it up. But I think there's reasons to point to and say, okay, I'm optimistic that is the case. But you certainly can't ignore the fact that he's a player that's going to be 34 years old next summer. And as we mentioned, core injuries, leg injuries, they've started to pile up the last couple of seasons. So I'm going to be curious to see his usage. And, with him and Giannis, as we mentioned at the top of the show, just because you rest during the regular season doesn't mean you're going to be healthy in the playoffs. But I do wonder if we see some more extended rest for those two guys, because they played a lot last season with the 67 game rule. They were playing a lot early in the season. I think that was one of the positive things that stood out the most early in the season of what's different this year versus last is, man, Giannis has only missed 2 games and it's December.
One of the other things I think with Dame that's important to note is that it's very easy to go on to Basketball Reference or whatever and have a look at the 23-24 season versus the 22-23 season. You go, holy shit, these are big drops. Everything has fallen away. You look at go to dunks and threes and look at his EPM go from 7.1 down to 4.6, and you go true shooting from 65 to 59 and go, oh my God, these are big drops. But if you just go back to any of the other seasons, he was that 2022-23 season was the outlier. That was the season that was well above everywhere else. Other seasons, he's around 60, 61 true shooting. Other seasons, he's shooting 35, 38 from 3, 37 from 3. He hasn't always been a consistent 40, 41% three-point shooter. His usage has been 28, 29, and it was at 27.5 this season. But it was just that one year where he was at 33.2. And he had 65 true shooting, that he put everything together and had this gigantic year. And then he hits Milwaukee, where we know there was going to be some sort of a drop in usage, and then the shooting sort of came back down. I'm not saying that he was at his normal level, because he wasn't, but the drop-off seems more extreme because we're comparing it to this absolute outlier season that he had versus some of the other seasons in the past. But one thing that was, I guess, a little bit more concerning was the fact that consistently he'd been a 33% assist rate player, and he was down at 28 this season. So that is, and we had that concern, who's going to have the ball? Is it Giannis? Is it Dame? And Middleton handles it somewhat as well. And I don't know how much that changes, Justin, just that assist rate or that assist potential that he had in previous years.
Yeah, and I think It is also worth pointing out that the raw numbers, they dropped off in the second half of the season, as you pointed to. But when Doc Rivers arrived, he was more efficient. And I think that was one of the things that Doc Rivers talked about, and Dame talked about too, was, Doc had mentioned even before taking the job on another podcast that you're Damian Lillard. You don't fit in with the team. Like, we need to fit in around you. And that was one of the things that he really tried to drive home. And stuff as simple as asking him too, like, what makes you comfortable in the offense? What are the sets that you like to run? And it was through that discovery that we realized the novel concept of, well, I like it when Brook Lopez screens for me, and I want him to screen off to the right so I can go to my left and get to the center of the court. We started to see more of that. And I think the numbers with Brook and Dame on the floor together were much better in large portions than Dame and Giannis for that reason. Brook's a better screener than Giannis is. In the offseason, even Doc has talked a little bit about not necessarily tipping his hand, but look, here's how I want these guys to handle it. When it's coming out of the net, when it's coming out of a dead ball or a made field goal, Dame needs to bring the ball up the floor. But when we get a rebound or a steal in or in transition, that's where Giannis takes over as the point guard because of how lethal he is there, and making that clear of, look, this is what we're looking for. There's no more of this, I guess I'll take it up this time, or you take it up this time, that this is the structure that I want. And that was just largely not there last year.
In terms of looking at like his assist numbers just in general, like his last year in Portland, if you look at assists and potential assists, they were sitting at 20.2. This year, they sat at 18.9, which is, it's a decent enough difference to understand. But we understood that would be the case. And that's one thing that I'm not sure changes that much. I do think there'll be a little bit more familiarity. There'll be some more efficiency. There might be a little bit more usage, but the assist numbers, not necessarily. And that's okay. So when we're reviewing Dame, I think there's a lot of things we take away from last season, but there are quite a few things we can throw out as well. In terms of bold prediction time, this does tie into something that we said earlier, or you said earlier, Justin, which is, honestly, it's bold. This is a 20-year-old second-year player playing for Doc Rivers, and you're like, Chris Livingston's going to play 50 games. So I don't know, man. Like, that's unless Glenn has got like things he's got to take care of over at his medical practice, this is going to be a tough one to get to. 50 games is a lot for anyone that's under the age of 25 for Glenn, so we'll see where this goes. But again, what we talked about earlier, I do think there is a possibility of this because I liked what Livingston showed. Now, Doc's just got to be able to see past the blindness of someone being able to contribute at this age. Or maybe that's why Doc just refuses to coach any rebuilding team, because he'd know that the best players would be young, and then he'd have to play them, and like that would cause some sort of like internal combustion issue. So we've got Livingston playing in 50 games as your bold prediction. That is pretty. What did he play last year? 20 games, I think, for a combined 20 minutes, something along those lines.
Yeah.
We haven't talked much about the draft picks because, again, they're not going to play, and I don't think we need to talk about them that much. Let's talk about a team record prediction. This is a team, again, that they're still really good.
Quick.
Yeah.
Can I just talk about the Chris Livingston component? So that was the toughest task for me, was trying to find, what's the bold prediction with this team? Like, I think Giannis is going to win his third MVP, or Dame is going to outscore Giannis. There wasn't really anything that's how I landed on this. And, I mentioned, look, here's how AJ Green fought his way into the rotation and found that playing time a year ago. AJ Green played in 56 games for the Bucks last year, which you may not realize just watching the Bucks. Anybody casually of, AJ Green probably played in a handful. No, he was a pretty consistent rotation player, 56 games. And it wasn't like, well, the bulk of that came under Adrian Griffin. I think 30 of those came with Doc Rivers as the head coach. So I think the blueprint is there. The path is there of, look, do these things and earn the minutes that we give you, and it will continue to build. And the other big piece is, just like we said, what other options do you have behind Bobby Portis and Taurean Prince? This is the only guy that you would look at. We saw that result in 50-plus games for AJ Green last year, so why can't it mean the same for Chris Livingston this year?
Green had that run, I believe, during the in-season tournament where he was playing some really big games through that December period as well, which was, again, people were like, who's this guy and what's actually happening here? But he was good, and maybe they're trying to make up for the fact that they had Sam Merrill and they let him go, and then he developed into something. Over in Cleveland, let's talk team record. Justin, again, this team is good. People just, I think, discount them a little bit because of things and the way they went last year. You've got them predicted at 51 and 31. Do you think the team is good enough to challenge? Okay, we can put Boston as Boston. things can always go wrong. Whatever, Boston is Boston.
Yeah.
Can they be the team that takes on Boston in the Eastern Conference Finals?
If healthy, yes. So I think last year, that was the maddening part about last season was, I think last year more than any of the previous 2 years after the championship, they matched up best with the Celtics than they had before. The issue was the rest of the league and the matchups weren't necessarily there. You have to get to Boston, and they just didn't. So, look, I think as we touched on all the moves they made in the offseason, it may not be massive, but they are upgrades. They have some young guys that if they develop, that's giving you a boost that you didn't have a season ago. The big piece is Khris Middleton's health, but certainly Giannis and Dame in the postseason. If those guys can be healthy, you like your chances. So I do think that they can be in that conversation with the Celtics, but I also understand, it's a team that has lost in the first round 2 years in a row. They've had health issues each of the last few seasons. You're not going to instinctively say, okay, it's the Celtics and the Bucks and maybe in the same tier with the Sixers and the Knicks and those other teams. Those teams are going to get mentioned before the Bucks for that reason. And I think that's actually an advantageous spot for the Bucks to be in, that this is the first time in 6 years that there isn't that real target on them and those great expectations. I think the expectations are, you have Giannis and Dame, and also the fact that this may well be the last year in this window with the way the contracts are lining up and the age of the roster. But for the most part, especially with what Philly did in the offseason and the Mikal Bridges move, they're going to come in under the radar, and that's probably a good thing for this group.
Last part of the show, Justin, just a quick quiz for the hosts that come on. It's really straightforward. There's not even a correct answer. There's no right or wrong here because we head into the 24-25 NBA season, Justin. So all I want you to tell me is the first player that comes to your mind that has worn number 24 or number 25 for the Milwaukee Bucks. This is really just an excuse for NBA people like us to just talk about funny names or people that come into our mind and reminisce a bit. Who's the first player wearing 24 or 25 that comes to your mind?
You have the list up, I'm assuming?
I do have the list up. I think there's 27 in Bucks history that have played in those numbers.
So there's 2 with 24. I'll go with Desmond Mason as the obvious choice from a very interesting era of Bucks basketball. 25. Look, I could go back to my youth and say, didn't Danny Manning wear 25?
Holy shit,
Bucks,
he did for the one season. Man, Jesus. Now, there's two groups of NBA people, I think, Justin. There are people who they go, man, I used to really know numbers when I was a kid, but I just don't remember anyone's number. Yeah. And then there's you pulling out a 1 year Danny Manning from 24 years ago and saying, yeah, he wore 25. How did you get that one? That is an amazing pull.
It was an ugly era of Bucks basketball. Yeah, it was an ugly era, and you remembered all of those guys. I grew up with the Blue Edwards and Todd Day, and
oh my God,
the Bucks had Danny Manning and Jerome Kersey era. Yeah. So, but 25, I could have sworn he wore 25. I would still obviously say Paul Pressey for number 25.
Paul Pressey was number 25. This is the, so you grew up around the Frank Bukowski era of Bucks basketball, and he didn't wear 24 or 25. There's someone currently on the roster who wears 24. Do you know who that is?
Someone that currently wears 24.
I'll give you a clue. He had a fake vertical leap number at the combine.
What am I missing here?
This
is really.
This is where you get. You're like, I see this guy every day, and I have no idea what his number is. This happens all the time. Again, he had an entirely inflated vertical number coming out of the combine. He was a two-sport athlete.
Look, how could I not? How could I not list the player who is very polarizing these days among Bucks fans? Yes, Pat Connaughton.
Yes, Pat Connaughton is the current number 24. The last number 25 was Serge Ibaka back in the 22 and 23 seasons. And, of course, who can forget the ill-fated stint of Joel Bolomboy wearing number 24 back in 2018. Justin, thank you for coming on and just, again, showing everyone how much better you are than Kane at talking about the Bucks. What's going on over at Locked On Bucks at the moment?
Yeah, we recently did our all eras draft. So names like Danny Manning and Jerome Kersey may have appeared. Frank Bukowski may have appeared on that list. But Camille, Frank, and I drafted our Bucks all-time team where you had to represent 1 decade, 1 player per decade. And once that player was taken, they were off the board. So we came up with some interesting teams. Their schedule is going to come out on Thursday. So we're going to have some reaction to that and some of the pitfalls and traps that could be there on the Bucks schedule. And later this offseason, we're doing our win totals draft, pretty similar to what Brian Windhorst and company have done in the past as well, between Camille and Frank and myself, just to see who's the best at gauging what teams are actually going to be good in the league this season.
Well, you can go check out all that stuff about the Bucks anytime you want to hear a Doc Rivers excuse. Justin will have that covered over on Locked On Bucks. Justin, thank you for coming on and chatting about Milwaukee here for us on Locked On Fantasy Basketball.
Anytime.
And that does bring us to the end of this show. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up, the subscribe. Leave all of your comments down below on this video as well. Like Justin said, the NBA schedule is coming up, but I'm pretty sure you're listening to this show after the schedule has been announced. I will do a show, I don't know when it will come out exactly, on the schedule and talking about how that impacts us for fantasy. I usually don't go too heavy into the schedule, but the thing where I'm always going to be looking out for, again, people look at back-to-backs. Usually there's like two games back-to-back differences. Like the max has 13, the minimum, or the max is 15, the minimum is 13 usually, right? It's not like a big deal. What we want to look for is we want to avoid the teams that have the 2-game week through fantasy playoffs if you're in head-to-head leagues. That's where things become more of a problem. And that's the thing we're really scouting for when talking about the NBA schedule. I've already said to hit the thumbs up, but I'm going to tell you now is that we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.